As an American expat living abroad, you sometimes face challenges you could never anticipate. This is my tale. I retired 7 years ago, sold my thriving business, and made the bold decision to explore the far corners of the world. Of all the mesmerizing places I visited, one stood out above the rest. After satisfying my wanderlust, I chose to settle in the Scottish Highlands, purchasing an imposing manor that overlooked the verdant, rolling hills. The estate was ancient, with a rugged charm, yet the previous owners had updated it with modern comforts. It was the perfect blend of old-world majesty and contemporary convenience. I was enthralled. The locals were cautious, if not outright skeptical, of me at first. They had endured their share of arrogant American tourists, and the prospect of one living among them did not inspire joy. Understanding this, I made a concerted effort to dispel their preconceptions by being the model neighbor, buying rounds at the pub, speaking respectfully, and doing my best to embrace their customs. But as I soon learned, goodwill alone does not erase ignorance. Despite my best intentions, I undoubtedly committed blunders. Thankfully, a few kind-hearted individuals took me under their wing, easing my integration into the community. Over time, even the most reserved residents began to warm up to me. Their smiles and nods as I passed filled me with a surprising sense of accomplishment. I felt like I belonged. Yet, my idyllic existence was soon marred by a series of unsettling disturbances. Night after night, I was jolted awake by jarring noises emanating from the manor's depths. Isolated as my home was, the nearest neighbor over a mile away, it was clear the noises came from within. At first, I stayed in bed, rationalizing that discretion was the better part of valor. But eventually, my curiosity overcame my apprehension. Armed with a flashlight and a 9-iron, I ventured into the basement. The clamor grew louder as I descended, defying logic. If it were an animal, the light and noise of my approach should have scared it off. Instead, the racket intensified, as though challenging my presence. I cursed myself for not calling the local constable, but pride kept me pressing forward. I didn't want to be the town's latest source of amusement. When I reached the basement's cold, stone floor, I swept the flashlight's beam across the room. The light fell upon a figure in the corner, a man. Yet something about him was deeply unsettling. His features were indistinct, his form translucent, as though he were both there and not. The beam passed through him, illuminating the wall behind. "About time you showed up," he barked in a thick Scottish brogue. "Now help me move this rubbish!" Stunned into compliance, I took a step forward before sense reasserted itself. When I hesitated, the figure, Walter Mulligan, as I would later learn, vanished as abruptly as he had appeared. I was left alone in the oppressive darkness, my heart hammering in my chest. The following evening, I shared my encounter at the pub. To my astonishment, the locals were unfazed. They laughed knowingly and explained that Mulligan, a former owner of the manor, had been searching for a hidden stash of gold his wife had concealed before her death. He would not rest until it was found. Determined to reclaim my home, I resolved to confront the spirit. Weeks passed before Mulligan reappeared, once again rummaging in the basement. This time, I mustered the courage to address him. "Mr. Mulligan," I said, keeping my voice steady, "your search is disturbing my peace. Perhaps we can help each other." To my surprise, he agreed. He explained that his wife had hidden their fortune, and his restless soul could not move on without it. Reluctantly, I offered my assistance. Together, we cleared the basement, uncovering an X etched into the stone wall. With Mulligan's urging, I struck the mark with a pickaxe. The wall gave way, revealing a dark pit. Before I could react, the floor collapsed beneath me, sending me plunging into the void. Mulligan's laughter echoed as I lay in the cold dirt, my phone my only lifeline. Rescued hours later, I returned to the pub, where the locals reveled in my misfortune. Mulligan, it seemed, had finally been freed, his laughter the last I would hear of him. But his parting lesson stayed with me: never trust a ghost's directions, especially when X marks the spot. Weeks passed, but the unsettling echoes of my encounter with Mulligan refused to fade. Despite the locals' jesting reassurances, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his departure had left something unfinished. The Manor's oppressive silence, once a solace, now felt like a harbinger of something darker. Little did I know, Mulligan's escapades were only the beginning. One cold, moonless night, as I sat nursing a glass of whiskey by the fire, a faint but distinct tapping echoed through the house. Unlike the chaotic racket of Mulligan's nightly rummaging, this was deliberate, rhythmic. It seemed to emanate from the Manor's upper floors, an area I rarely ventured into. My heart sank as I realized this was not over. Gripping the same flashlight that had seen me through my previous ordeal, I ascended the grand staircase. Each creak of the ancient wood beneath my feet seemed to amplify the growing dread in my chest. The tapping grew louder as I approached the master bedroom, its door slightly ajar. I hesitated. This room, untouched since I'd moved in, held an air of foreboding that I could no longer ignore. Pushing the door open, I swept the room with my flashlight. It landed on a massive, dust-covered wardrobe in the corner. The tapping ceased. For a moment, I considered retreating, but curiosity and an unyielding need for answers drove me forward. As I opened the wardrobe, the stench of damp wood and decay assaulted my senses. Inside, to my horror, was a crumpled letter clutched in the skeletal remains of a hand. The parchment was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were clear. To the next unfortunate soul, beware. This house holds secrets that demand more than you are willing to give. The signature at the bottom read, Annalise Mulligan. My pulse quickened. Annalise Mulligan, Walter's infamous wife. The locals had dismissed her as a shrew who kept her husband on a tight leash, but this letter hinted at something far more sinister. The unease I had felt since buying the manor now crystallized into a chilling certainty. This house was a trap, and I was its latest victim. In the days that followed, I began noticing subtle but unnerving changes around the estate. Shadows that moved independently of any light source. Whispers that faded as soon as I tried to discern their origin. Objects disappearing only to reappear in impossible locations. The house seemed alive, its malevolence growing bolder with each passing day. One particularly harrowing night, I awoke to find my bedroom door wide open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim glow of the hallway. It was not Walter Mulligan but a tall, gaunt woman with hollow eyes that burned with an unnatural light. Annalise. She did not speak but pointed a long, bony finger toward the basement. Terrified but compelled by an invisible force, I followed her. She glided ahead, her form barely disturbing the air, as if she were a phantom memory of herself. When we reached the basement, she vanished, leaving me alone with the oppressive darkness and the suffocating weight of her lingering presence. "You've started something," a disembodied voice echoed, unmistakably Annalise's. "Now you must finish it." The cryptic command sent shivers down my spine. I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my grip, as the basement walls seemed to close in around me. Then, as if guided by an unseen hand, I turned to face the pit I had uncovered weeks earlier. The gaping void seemed deeper now, its bottom obscured by impenetrable shadows. Over the next several weeks, I dedicated myself to unearthing the manor's secrets. Driven by equal parts fear and determination, I combed through every inch of the house, uncovering hidden compartments, forgotten diaries, and cryptic symbols etched into the very foundation. Each discovery painted a darker picture of the Mulligans' lives. Walter, it turned out, had been far from the hapless victim of his wife's financial control. He was a ruthless and violent man, feared by the community. Annalise, desperate to protect herself and their fortune, had turned to forbidden rituals, sealing his fate, and her own, within the manor's walls. The treasure he sought was not gold but the shattered remnants of his soul, scattered and hidden by Annalise to prevent his escape. The more I uncovered, the more the house retaliated. My sleep was plagued by vivid nightmares of Walter's wrath and Annalise's cold, calculating gaze. Doors slammed shut on their own. The fireplace roared to life without warning, its flames licking hungrily at the air. And always there was the tapping, a constant reminder of my unwelcome role in their eternal feud. Then, one fateful night I found it. Beneath a loose floorboard in the library was a small, ornate box, its surface inscribed with symbols I dared not decipher. Inside was a shard of glass, no larger than a coin, pulsing with an otherworldly glow. As I held it, a deafening scream tore through the manor, a sound so filled with anguish and rage that I dropped the box and fell to my knees. "You've done it now!" Annalise's voice hissed in my ear. "Release it, or suffer as we have." But before I could react, the shard disintegrated into a fine mist, which swirled around me before dissipating into the air. The house fell silent, its oppressive weight lifting for the first time since I'd moved in. Walter's laughter, distant but triumphant, echoed one last time before fading into nothingness. Annalise did not return. The shadows ceased their restless dance. The whispers fell silent. But I knew better than to believe the ordeal was over. The manor had claimed me as its own, and its secrets, though dormant, still lingered, waiting for the next foolhardy soul to awaken them. Weeks turned into months, and life at the manor returned to a tenuous normalcy. The shadows no longer danced, the whispers no longer intruded, and the oppressive silence felt more like peace than foreboding. Yet, the experience had left its mark. I carried the weight of what I'd uncovered, an unshakable reminder that some mysteries are better left buried. The locals' attitudes toward me shifted after my ordeal became the talk of the pub. They regarded me with a mix of respect and apprehension. To have confronted both mulligans and lived to tell the tale elevated me in their eyes, though it didn't stop them from making me the subject of their ghost stories. Despite their newfound camaraderie, I found myself retreating into solitude. The manor, for all its dark history, had become a sanctuary of sorts. Its walls, once suffocating, now felt protective. I took to restoring the estate, repairing the damage caused by years of neglect and my own desperate explorations. It was a labor of love, a way to reclaim the space and make it truly mine. But the manor's past refused to stay buried. Late one evening, as I sorted through a box of forgotten trinkets in the attic, I came across an old, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. The author was Annalise Mulligan. The entries began innocuously enough, detailing her life at the manor and her strained marriage to Walter. But as I read on, the tone grew darker. She wrote of his violent outbursts, his insatiable greed, and her increasing desperation to protect herself and their fortune. The final entries were almost indecipherable, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They spoke of a ritual, a binding meant to trap Walter's soul and prevent him from harming her, or anyone else, again. One passage struck me with particular force. "I fear what I have done. The house is no longer mine, no longer his. It belongs to something else now, something older and far more dangerous. I can only hope that my sacrifice will be enough to contain it." A chill ran down my spine as I closed the journal. Annalise's fear was palpable, her warnings as urgent now as they must have been then. It was clear that the manor's dark presence was no mere ghost story but something far more insidious. And though Walter and Annalise were gone, their legacy, and the entity they had awakened, remained. In the weeks that followed, I wrestled with the decision of whether to stay or leave. The Manor's beauty and solitude still called to me, but its history weighed heavily on my mind. Ultimately, I chose to stay. Perhaps it was foolishness, or perhaps it was the belief that I could reclaim the house from its dark past. Either way, I resolved to make it my own. I began researching the symbols and rituals Annalise had described, delving into texts I never imagined I'd read. By day, I restored the manor, breathing new life into its ancient halls. By night, I sought answers, determined to understand the forces at play and ensure they remained dormant. The locals, ever superstitious, warned me against meddling further. "You've done enough," they said. "Let the past rest." But I couldn't. The manor had chosen me, or perhaps I had chosen it. Either way, its secrets were now mine to bear. Years have passed since that fateful night in the basement. The manor stands as a testament to resilience, both its own and mine. I've made peace with its shadows, though I know they're never truly gone. They're part of the house, as much as the stone and timber. And perhaps, in some strange way, they're part of me now too. The locals still tell stories of the American who tamed the haunted manor. They embellish, of course, adding details that make me sound braver and the ghosts more fearsome. I let them have their fun. After all, every legend needs a hero. But as I sit by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a figure in the corner of my eye. Whether it's Walter, Annalise, or something older, I'll never know. What I do know is this: the manor's story is far from over. And as its keeper, either is mine,